So, this museum's mission is to uncover and share stories about diverse people, compelling events that sparked America's ongoing experiment in liberty, equality, and self-government. And the exhibition that's brought us all together, Black Founders, the Forten Family of Philadelphia, which is running through the end of November here at the Museum of the American Revolution, will convince you, first of all, the Forten family made a lot of sparks. And by looking at 3 generations of a family about how the American Revolution sparked this ongoing and still in our present day unfinished American Revolution, right? This is a big message about this museum, even though there's cannons on the corner here, and they're really cool cannons. This is not just a story about a war that took place long ago or a group of guys in a building 2 blocks away looking at, admittedly, a very important piece of paper. This is about America's story in all of its richness and detail, its warts and all, and that's really what the museum is dedicated to. So here for the 3rd of our 4 2022-2023 Read the Revolution evening programs, we're so excited to welcome Julie Winch, Professor Julie Winch, who has written the definitive biography of James Forten. She's one of 3 really important people who you're going to meet tonight. One of them is Atwood Kip Forten Jacobs, I got this right, 4 times great-grandson of James Forten, and he'll be in conversation with us a little bit later, and the 5 times great-granddaughter of James Forten, Taylor Rodriguez Jacobs as well, who I told had to tell a joke or sing a show tune when she got up on the stage later, but we're not going to hold you to that, I promise. I also want to recognize members of our Forten Exhibition Committee, many of whom are online, some of you in the audience tonight. We had an incredibly energized group of people who came together to help us raise money so that we could bring all these treasures together, including items that have come from the United Kingdom, items that have literally not been back in America since 1783, since they left on a British ship in New York Harbor. Incredible items that passed down through the Forten family and have never been seen in public before, all brought together here. And even more important than that kind of financial support is the community engagement, the efforts that we go to try to make sure that communities who would not immediately feel welcomed or think that a museum in this neighborhood called the Museum of the American Revolution would tell a story that was relevant to them. And that is absolutely the important work that we're trying to do. So this has been already a really successful exhibition. I also want to thank our friends who are here from the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, which will celebrate in 2024 its 200th anniversary. Really one of Philadelphia's great legacy archives here. We could not have put this exhibition on without the treasures that are curated there at the exhibition. And I think other than getting on our website and making sure you are a member of the Museum of the American Revolution, the second thing I think you should do is check out the website of hsp.org and consider supporting our great partners there who are just a short walk away from the museum. Now, there's some programs that I want to bring to your attention that are tied in with the theme of the evening. First of all, we're always interested in engaging young people and getting them interested in history. And not everybody has a grandpa like mine or yours to tell those stories. And so we're always trying to think about other ways to engage young people in imagining themselves connected to the story of the Revolution. One of the effective ways that we've been doing this over the last couple of years is engaging local playwrights to do short, we actually commission short plays that are based on historical characters. In this case, you're seeing a young James Forten, circa 1783, at the end of the Revolutionary War. He's played by local actor Nathan Alfred Tate. And this is a play that was written by Marissa Kennedy, who's a local playwright here in Philadelphia. And is Steve Crum in the audience today? I heard, yeah, there he is. Old Forten on the right, or we'll say classic Forten, seasoned Forten, wise and sage James Forten has just joined. My dream was to think about and my staff indulged me in these flights of fancy, was to think about if I could hear from a James Forten at the end of the Revolutionary War, and what does he see as the promise of this American Revolution, and this thing that he's been part of? A man who heard the Declaration of Independence read as a young boy at 9 years old, who was a combat veteran at age 14 and a prisoner of war at age 15, and then fast forward to the end of his life and think about to what degree had America lived up to that promise and where was it falling short? And that's the idea between this sort of two-act play. If you go onto the museum's website, you can look for dates in which you'll be able to see these performances done. We will also have them filmed, and they will be available on the website as well. We make these available as special programs for schools. So if you are connected in any way to educators and would like to book programs where literally we'll do a performance and a talkback opportunity for your schools, that's another great opportunity as well. On May 12th, we're going to play some music. I think we might even be in this room when that happens. The Jeremy Winston Chorale will be coming here to Philadelphia to perform the music of a dear neighbor and friend of James Forten, Francis Frank Johnson, who was one of the great composers and musicians in the early Republic. I don't know why my sister's calling me, but I'm going to silence her for now. And so that'll be performed here at the museum on May 12th. And then, as if it couldn't get any better, you can take a walking tour at the museum here. We, of course, offer walking tours of revolutionary Philadelphia. This is a wonderful place to sort of understand what the setting of all these great events of the American Revolution was. We have developed one specifically tied into the Black Founders exhibition. We are literally in James Forten's neighborhood. As I mentioned earlier, he was born within sight of the front door of the museum. Lombard Street, South Street, this was the home of America's largest free African-American community in the immediate decades following the American Revolution. And that has a long and complicated story that you will learn on one of our great walking tours here as well. Now, for those of you who came in person, there's a witness object. We love witness objects. We like to think about these objects not as just these dusty old things that you kind of walk past. These are real, sort of tangible connections to the people and stories that we uncover here at the museum. And so just off to my right, those of you who are here in the audience had a chance to see James Forten's Family Bible, recording births and deaths all the way to the 1995, am I allowed to give it away, birth of Taylor in the front row here. And so a real living, tangible object. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. We brought it up from Black Founders exhibit. So for those of you who visit to see the special exhibition through the end of November, you'll be able to see that on display as part of the exhibition. So I should stop talking and let the people who know a lot about this start talking. So I just want to welcome Julie Winch up. Julie taught at the University of Massachusetts in Boston for 36 years until she just retired in 2021. Just seems like yesterday, doesn't it? Professor Winch has a BA in history from Cambridge University and her graduate degrees from London University and Bryn Mawr, nice local school here. As you will detect soon, she is originally from the United Kingdom, but she's lived in the United States since 1977 and has published 6 books, our favorite, of course, being A Gentleman of Color, The Life of James Forten, which won the American Historical Association's Wesley Logan Prize, and also Between Slavery and Freedom, Free People of Color in America from Settlement to Civil War. She's acted, she's not just here because, we invited her for the night. Julie, sometimes I think we should set up a camp bed in Washington's tent for her because she's here so often. She has been helping us with our teacher training for K through 12 K through 12 educators, teacher professional development, was an advisor to the Black Founders exhibit, and actually advised Marissa Kennedy and the staff when we were developing those Meet James Forten plays. She's a polymath on the subject and is going to sort of set the tone this evening, talk a little bit about her journey of uncovering James Forten's life, a little bit about why perhaps we should consider him one of the great Americans that obviously he deserves. We'll be joined by Kip Jacobs afterwards for a little bit of conversation, and we'll take your questions. For those of you online, please use the chat function. Throw in any questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before the end of the evening. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Julie Winch. Madame.
Good evening. I thought a lot about what I should talk about tonight. By the standards of his age, Forten lived a long life. He was 75 in an era when a lot of people didn't make it into their 50s and 60s, and many of them didn't make it into their 40s. I could talk about him as an abolitionist, as a master craftsman, as a savvy businessman, as the father of a remarkable group of young men and women who went on to make their own marks in the world in a whole series of reform causes. But I'm not going to talk about that tonight. I'm going to talk about young James Forten, the one we would never have known about had he died in a British prison ship, while he was 15 years of age. We know about him because he survived and he returned. When I first came across James Forten's name, I was an undergraduate in Britain longer ago than I care to remember. And I was intrigued by this mention of a teenage African-American privateer sailing out of Philadelphia. I discovered that he was freeborn. I knew that there were enslaved men who fought for the British and various fronts on the promise of freedom, but he was already free. So why did he risk his life in a war where he could simply have said, you know what, wake me up when it's over, and I'll deal with the fallout, whether it's still King George or whether it's a different form of government. But that is, as we know, not what he does, and that was what intrigued me. I have yet to write a book that progresses chronologically. I dive into something where it interests me, which might be somewhere in the middle, somewhere towards the end, and then I will do the research that will help me locate that first episode. In the case of James Forten, that first episode was when I uncovered the fact that at 9 years old, not quite 10, he was standing in the State House yard, steps away from where we are now, listening to the Declaration of Independence read to the public for the first time. That immediately means that we have to discount that popular image of all those heroes on that hot July day being older white men. Because is this 9-year-old African-American child going to just push his way in? How many other black and brown faces were there? It made me wonder how many other young people. Maybe, I thought first of all that he went home and told his widowed mother and his sister what he had heard. Maybe they were there. Maybe this was not an all-male crowd. What he made of the Declaration of Independence, I honestly don't know. We have to remember the social media of his time was what was spread in the streets, what was disseminated at meetings. And let's face it, we're all human enough today that if we see a crowd, we just gotta go over and be a little nosy. Gee, what's going on here? What are they talking about? Maybe we'll walk away, but maybe we stick around. He stuck around. And that image of what went on in the State House yard, his response, his possible response to it, fascinated me. The first chapter of the book that I eventually wrote on James Forten was not on a spring or a fall day in September 1766, a little baby boy was born. It was James Forten and the Revolution. And that was the chapter I wrote. I thought, well, if it intrigues me, and I will talk about some of the other exploits of James Forten during the Revolutionary War, maybe it will intrigue a publisher. Maybe they will just say, oh, this is like so boring, don't want to proceed with this. I'm glad to say that it struck a chord with my publisher, the person who eventually became my publisher, and I don't think either he or I anticipated that it would be 12 years from my signing the contract and really starting on the book to my actually delivering a complete manuscript. But this happens. Good publishers are used to academics being a little slow there because she will say, oh, but I have to pursue this part of it and I need to pull at that thread here, and then suddenly you've got all this stuff and you have to decide what you're going to do with it. But here I have James Forten, not quite 10 years old, the summer of 1776. Fast forward, his family, which consists, as I said, of his widowed mother and his older sister, they stay in Philadelphia during the British occupation. Do they stay because they're loyalists? Well, no, they stay because it's their home. They're like a lot of people, black and white. This is where they live. They don't have any particular need to flee because they've been such gung-ho patriots that they better get out of town in a hurry. They don't necessarily embrace the British, but they're just gonna hope to survive another day, another week. So I really cannot say I know exactly what the Fortens did during the British occupation, or indeed slightly afterwards. But I do know what happened when James Forten turned 14. And that was that he signed up on board an American privateer, the Royal Lewis, which of course is named for and students who said, well, why is it royal if they didn't like kings? I said, this is after Louis XVI of France, and he's the ally of independence. Well, didn't he in the revolution lost his head? I said, yes, that happened later. This is a long experience of teaching history 101. Occasionally I would get graduate classes and upper-level undergraduate classes, but a lot of the time it was in the trenches. I've got to take a history course. Make me stay awake through it. So I would have to explain that Louis XVI was supporting the cause of independence because it was a way of getting back at the British. Anyway, a lot of privateers that were sailing out of Philadelphia were fairly small vessels. They were converted merchantmen, commerce raiders just going out there hoping that they would somehow run into a nice, heavily laden, small enough, lightly armed British vessel or pro-British vessel that they could take. The vessel that James Forten sailed on was purpose-built as a privateer, as a commerce raider. The man who was the captain of that vessel, Stephen Decatur, we know more about his famous son, obviously a generation later, who would die in a tragic duel, who was a true American hero, but that's not to take anything away from his father. The older Stephen Decatur has this privateer. He and his backers want to set sail in pursuit of nice fat prizes as soon as they can. Stephen Decatur is an equal opportunity employer, as were many privateering captains of the period, because they needed men and boys. You could not afford to discriminate. because you wanted to set sail. And this is the situation that Decatur is in. He needs 200 men and boys. When Forten turns up, he is one of 20 African Americans on board, a tenth of the crew. They set sail pretty much as soon as Decatur has his letters of marque, and they have very good hunting on that first cruise. Forten is definitely putting himself at risk, because you've got to think what his role was. He's a powder boy. So he is scurrying backwards and forwards across the deck, carrying powder, carrying shot to the men, the older men manning the gun crews. He's a tempting target for a sharpshooter on another vessel. Who are you going to home in on? You're going to home in on movement. He could easily have been killed. There are reports, allergy season has started early this year, and I have to say it's a good few degrees warmer here, and all the buds are out that have yet to come into bud where I'm living, which is Maine. So I've been snuffling since I got here yesterday. But anyway, they have really good hunting on that first cruise. They take a number of British vessels or vessels that are heading towards British ports. If they're on their way to New York, which is held by the British, you can assume that they are the enemy and you can go after them. There is no nobility here. You don't size up a vessel and say, we can't attack that one because it's so much smaller than us. It's like, go for it. We want easy targets. Forten's first cruise does end successfully. He returns to Philadelphia. He is unscathed. Other men had suffered injuries on the cruise, but he is back. And if you've seen Don Troiani's marvelous picture, Brave Men as Ever Fought, yes, there is artistic license, but it's based so much on what James Forten witnessed. It was on September 2nd, 1781, that he stood in the street in Philadelphia and he watched George Washington march his troops south to face Cornwallis in Virginia. And he took note of the New England regiments. We think what he saw was the Rhode Island Black Regiment, and he saw that there were black men under arms in the Patriot cause. He remembered that. 50 years later, he is still talking about that to his friend, abolitionist editor William Lloyd Garrison. It meant a great deal to him. I looked at the story, I realized when those troops came through and when he would have seen them, it was the day he turned 15. And I thought, wow, what a way to spend your 15th birthday. He goes back to the privateer. The Royal Lewis is on its second cruise. That second cruise ends in disaster, and it does so very, very quickly. They're one day out of port. Decatur had apparently thought that, rough seas, I know there are some British vessels out there, but, we can head north. They won't turn that quickly. Maybe they won't spot us. Bad move. There were two Royal Navy vessels, one called the Amphion, the other called La Nymphe, and it's got a French name because it was a French vessel and the British captured it and they made it a British vessel, but there was already one called the Nymph, so they decided, let's keep that La Nymphe name. It got very confusing. But anyway, here is Decatur looking at a British warship bigger than his own, better armed than his own, bearing down on him. He tries to flee. So you can imagine all the men and boys on board trying to put up as much canvas as they can. Just get out of here, flee. But the British Captain John Bazley, is very good at what he does. There is a chase that lasts 7 hours, but finally the Royal Lewis has no option. Decatur has to surrender. So he surrenders to Captain Bazley, who's stuck with all these prisoners, got, vessels fully crewed. And he takes 80 of those prisoners on his vessel. He's going to take them to the prison ship Jersey in Bridge-held New York City. The other guys end up on La Nymphe. Forten's luck holds at this point. He is put on board the Amphion, and yes, he's heading to a prison ship in New York City, but it happens that John Bazley has his 2 sons on board. One of them, John Jr., this is his 2nd or 3rd cruise. He's 14, he's a midshipman. He is busy every hour of the day. But one suspects rather bratty Henry Bazley is on his first cruise. He's 12. He is on the muster as his father's servant, which is obviously a fiction to get him on board and get him rations. And one really does have to suspect that he's getting in the way. You can't get in the way on a warship. Somebody's got to keep an eye on him. And Captain Bazley picks 15-year-old James Forten to do that. Apparently there is something about James Forten. James Forten's son-in-law says it's his honest and open countenance. Maybe it's his age. He's a little bit older than Henry, but it's not having a 40-year-old watch him. And so you can imagine this 12-year-old, maybe somewhat obnoxious British kid, and this just turned 15, freeborn African-American child serving in the Patriot forces. They're forced to get together. And surprisingly, they hit it off. Forten would later say it was over a game of marbles on the deck. But apparently, Captain Bazley approves of the good influence that James Forten is having on his son. And as they get closer and closer to New York, it's time to hand over the prisoners. Captain Bazley calls upon James Forten and tells him that he doesn't have to go. That if he just says the word, James can go to England and he can be educated with Henry. And then the Bazley family, which is a significant naval family, will give Forten their patronage. Forten never articulates a fear that Bazley intends to enslave him. He talks in very positive terms about Bazley, but at the end of the day, he cannot accept this offer because obviously what goes with the offer is forget all this independence nonsense. You have to be a loyal subject of the king. You are a loyal subject of the king, aren't you? Well, obviously, Forten let that one go a long time ago. He rejects the offer. Bazley repeats it several times, and Forten rejects it every one of those times. And he probably had a very good idea of what lay ahead of him, because the prison ship Jersey that he's going to be transferred to is just a notorious hellhole. And I'll just throw in here, I guess it's my favorite story. I believed the account that James Forten gave, but there's something about being a historian, you want to see it in writing. I had no idea. When you read the master's log and the captain's log of the Amphion and La Nymphe, they're really short entries. Nowhere in the log is going to say, Captain Bazley, we picked up this interesting young boy from Philadelphia, and I made him. It's bearing at noon. bearing at 6 o'clock, heavy seas. It's that kind of thing. I said, how am I ever going to find this? And it was a naval historian who said, follow the money trail. I said, what do you mean the money trail? He said they had to account for all the rations that were dispersed. He said, if you can find the Jersey muster roll, you got a good chance of finding James Forten, because they listed everybody from the captain down to the most humble individual on board. And he also reminded me that these are prisoners, so their names have to be entered on the muster so that eventually when their name comes to the top and there's somebody they can be exchanged for, they get their opportunity. And I was at the National Archives in Cuba, Scott and his staff here have heard this story from me so many times. I should put the mouth on automatic pilot, as one of my colleagues used to refer to it. But I got hold of the muster roll. The National Archives in London, if anybody has ever been there, is a rather dignified space. I went page after page. I could not find Forten's name. It's right at the end of the list of prisoners from the Royal Lewis. And I wanted to do what I was familiar with from soccer, which is the football I grew up with, and yell, go, go! But that will get you thrown out. And so you have to just bite your lip and say, I found it. So that was what I found. I knew he was there. 7 months on this prison ship was tantamount to a death sentence for many people. In a lot of respects, I think of this as James Forten's middle passage, because you were denied adequate food. The food you did get was of appalling quality, medical care rudimentary, and people were dying around you every day. People were going insane with the pressure of what they were experiencing. And I often thought back and I thought, he must have had a sense of what his ancestors went through. But he makes it. And he makes it even though he passes up an opportunity to escape. You couldn't swim from the Jersey. It was a 2-mile swim, and then you were on mud flats, and the area was under Tory control anyway, so you're likely to be turned around and sent straight back. What Forten does is he knows there is an officer on board who is likely to be exchanged for somebody who is in Patriot hands. And that man's sea chest is going to be sent back with him. Supposedly, Forten requests the officer's permission to get into that sea chest and just be carried off the vessel. But he passes up that opportunity to another Philadelphian who is a Daniel Bruton, who's a couple of years younger than him, a white boy he might already know from the streets of Philadelphia, but someone who is in worse shape than he is. Bruton gets off the ship in that chest. But Bruton remembers that lifelong. This is not just conveniently forgotten once the war is over. Forten and Bruton run into one another many times over the years, and there's a very poignant story of Bruton coming to visit Forten when Forten is dying, and kind of bidding farewell to his old friend. But Forten's name eventually makes it to the top of the list for exchanges. And the British just want to get rid of these people. I mean, they're losing this war. And they just row a bunch of prisoners ashore and dump them. It's like, all right, bye. Don't write. Forten and his friends are put ashore. They've got to get their way back to Philadelphia. They have no shoes. They make it to Trenton before anybody takes pity on them and gives them shoes. They're trying to get food along the way as best they can. So if you think of this literally motley crew of ex-prisoners, black and white, in pretty pitiful conditions, they're trying as best they can to get back to Philadelphia. Forten returns to Philadelphia to find that his mother and sister had been told he'd been killed. So when you can just imagine what happens when he walks in the door. But he has made it back. They've been told he'd been shot from the rigging and fallen onto the deck and been killed when the Amphion took the Royal Lewis. Even if they got word that no, he's actually on the Jersey, was he going to survive the Jersey? But here he is at age 15, having grown from a boy to a young man. And of course, the rest is history. What he will do is, when the war is over, he travels to Britain. If one were making a movie of this, one would have him turning up at the Baisleys' home saying, "Remember me, James?" From the Amphion. No evidence that he ever saw them again. But he spends a year in Britain after the war, and then he comes back to Philadelphia, and that's when he begins his apprenticeship with Robert Bridges, the sailmaker, whom he probably knew from his childhood days because his father had worked for Robert Bridges as a free man. And of course, as we know, Forten would go on to take over the sail loft when Bridges retired, to use the money that he was generating from being a really good, really skilled sailmaker to purchase real estate, bank stock, and go to business school, but he knew a lot about how you made money move. And of course, he would plow a lot of that money into the causes that increasingly came to the fore for him, which was, yes, the elimination of slavery, and that remains a prime cause for him lifelong. But at the same time, he would argue, as he did in Letters of a Man of Color, that not being a slave was not good enough if you were still in this position between slavery and freedom. And of course, we know that he would go on to fight and to agitate for these causes the rest of his life. By the time he was 75 and he was dying, and the poor man was sick for quite some time before he died, people were reaching out with their memories of him, not just Daniel Bruton from the prison ship, but friends, black and white, from the reform movement, businessmen who had done business with him, for whom he had made sales, for whom he had traded real estate over the years. On the day of his funeral, which happened 2 days after his passing, there was just a huge concourse of people. We know that St. Thomas's Church was packed to overflowing, and it was mourners, both black and white, and in the streets there were people who stood to watch the cortege pass by and remove their hats. This is something that intrigued a British traveller. He knew by 1842 the level of racial violence and discrimination in Philadelphia and elsewhere. And he realizes, because he can see the family members, guys, so-called colored. Well, how come he's getting this big send-off? Why are there white merchants, removing their hats? Why are there people heading towards St. Thomas's? What's going on here? And he's just, this Forten, he was an important businessman. And the British guy doesn't bother to ask anymore. That's good enough for him, he moves on to the next city. But as I've tried to argue in Forten biography, if we let ourselves sort of step back as this English visitor does and says, oh, he was a big businessman, he was a reformer, that is such a small fraction of the story that we really owe it to James Forten, to his descendants, and actually the whole community of which he was part, to dig a lot further and a lot deeper. So, thank you.
I'll be the thorn and you can be the roses. How's that? Well, thank you, Julie, and welcome, Kip. I would love to ask you a two-part question. I'd love to know a little bit about where you grew up. I know you don't live local, but you grew up local. Yes. And sort of what was your knowledge of this story as you were growing up? And then the second part is, of course, sort of like those, great television dating shows. How did you first meet? Because you two have known each other for like 2 decades now, and this is a great story as well.
Well, so, yes, I am from here, from Philadelphia, born and raised, but I did not know a lot about James Forten or what he had done through the years. I did have a great-grandmother that would come in from Pittsburgh to visit me, Daisy Parker, and she would mention bits and pieces about James Forten and what he had done, but it wasn't to any great extent, number one. Number two, I was sitting on her knee when she was telling me this, so how much retention would I have at the age of 5? So it didn't really hit me, although I did have the Bible, and as I got older, I was shown the Bible, and it was very interesting. I knew it was a very valuable piece of history. It wasn't until I had my own child, and my daughter Taylor had to do a report in 7th grade during Black History Month that would be a report on someone famous who had been dead for at least 50 years and was black. And the only person I could think of was James Forten. Now, I'd never really discussed his history to her, but I did bring out the Bible and we looked in there, and there was only bits and pieces, births, deaths, and marriages, but no detailed information. I had some clippings from Jet and Ebony magazines, but it was also minimal information. So we went to, I said, well, let's wing it and go to the library and see what we can find. You go this way, I'll go that way. And, it was just amazing. It was, went down the one aisle, an F section, and I'm looking, I'm like, am I seeing this? And on the shelf was this book. And all I saw of it was that. So I just stood there for a while. I'm like, wait a minute, this is unbelievable. So yeah, I kind of yelled in the library and called my daughter. And she came over. I said, I think you're going to do pretty good on this paper. So yeah, we sat there for a brief moment and looked through the book. I just had to get out of there and take it home and really sit down with it and go through it myself and enjoy this, and then share what I could to help guide her through her writings. It's amazing, and it was a lot of detail, and it's a wonderful book because it is so detailed. It takes you back in time, and you go through the life and times of James Forten and his family. So, we spent a couple of days reading and sharing information and finessing and wordsmithing this report. And it worked out. She got an A. And the teacher and I had a good conversation about it. So they were all, her teachers, in fact, I think she invited some other teachers in to discuss it. I have been searching high and low for that paper. I know I have it in my possession somewhere in one of the boxes, but I'm going to keep digging for it because I know I have it. But yeah, that was pretty much it. So I ended up, enjoying the book, and then I said, well, I need to get in touch with the author, and went online and looked hard and didn't have to look that long, and then I noticed I could find Julie Winch, and I gave her, I think I emailed you first, and this is in 2007, and we have been in touch ever since, but we just met last October, and that was wonderful, and there is a snippet of that moment in one of the videos, I think that's just been produced. So it's just been a wonderful journey. What Julie has done is nothing short of remarkable. 12 years of research, and to have that curiosity and to come from the other side of the pond and to spend that time and effort, it says a lot about, not only about James Forten, but absolutely about Professor Winch. So I can't tell you from the bottom of my heart how much I love what you've done. It's tremendous. Now, I think the next step is to try to find a way to get this man on a postage stamp. That's my next mission.
Actually, there was an even better suggestion a little earlier. I'm looking at you.
Okay.
Why is there not a United States naval vessel named for James Forten?
Oh, well, okay.
Surely someone in this room knows someone who knows someone that we can get that going. And I am looking at you, Phil Reese, by the way.
That would be nice. Yes. That would be nice.
With the 250th coming up. And,
oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, hey.
You heard it here first.
Let's make it happen.
Well, I know I'd love to invite some folks in the audience to ask some questions. If we can just get you a mic up here. Jen's going to run the mic so folks online can hear.
Hey guys, my name's Rob. I'm a high school teacher in North Philly. I teach a Philadelphia-specific African-American history class. Took my kids here last week. Phenomenal. An aspect of the story that I've been increasingly fascinated with is the connection of James Forten to another unsung hero, Robert Purvis. I mean, and what I also think is fascinating is they kind of bridge gaps, right? Like James Forten takes us out of the Revolution and Robert Purvis takes us into the Civil War. And an integral part of Philadelphia Underground Railroad. Robert Purvis marries James Forten's daughter, so it's James Forten's son-in-law. Can you speak to their relationship and how maybe he met his daughter and their relationship growing up? Because he gave his eulogy, even though I don't know if it was publicly given because it was more of a book, even like too big for me to download on my laptop. That's how long. But yeah, if you could speak to the relationship between Robert Purvis, his son-in-law, and James Forten.
Yeah. First of all, yes, it's a very close relationship. Purvis's father has passed away, leaving him and his younger brother. They're in Philadelphia. Their mother has married. She's moved to New York. And they sort of fall into the Forten orbit. So it's certainly on the cards that Robert is going to marry one of the Forten daughters. I should say that James Forten doesn't strike here as particularly ambitious. This is not a Mrs. Bennet out of Pride and Prejudice. Oh, look, a wealthy young man must be in need. It sort of seems to happen naturally. It is a very affectionate marriage. The tragedy of the marriage is that they lose a number of their children. But Robert Purvis is in many ways the son that James Forten wants to have. The memorial address, which is one of the major sources we have, is something that Robert Purvis prepares, and it's then sold for $1 a copy for the, I can't remember if it's Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society or the American Anti-Slavery Society, but it's a way that even in death, James Forten can serve the cause, because obviously people want to find out more about this man they've admired. They're more than willing to hand over $1 if they can afford it for a good cause. But Robert Purvis is really a remarkable individual.
Jen,
So
do you have...
I'm glad you're making that connection.
I think we might have a,
Yeah, we have a question
from
on
the Zoom.
for Dr. Winch from Anne. She wants to know what moment first sparked your interest in James Forten.
I think it would have to be, well, a couple of moments. That mention of him being in the State House yard and thinking, what is a 9-year-old African-American child doing, listening to this? The fact that he's even there. So that got me. And then this business of the privateer. I mean, somebody could end up dead out there. He is not fighting because he is enslaved and says, I have to potentially trade my life for a hope of freedom. That was what grabbed me. And once that had really gotten my attention, then I had to know the rest of the story. I discovered this, I sort of first encountered James Forten, as I said, when I was an undergraduate in England. I didn't know that graduate work, I was applying to a number of American graduate schools, that I would end up at a graduate school that was not far from Philadelphia. So I could do a little rummaging around for that first graduate paper I had to do. And I thought, much like you in the library, I thought, I wonder if I can find out anything else about James Forten. Little did I know, of course. Pull at that one thread, and all of a sudden, you have a mess of stuff.
Just to be equal, anyone on this side? Any questions? Up in the front, yeah. Noah Lewis, who is no stranger to James Forten.
Well, actually, a lot of times in my presentations from the second grade on down, I tell the story of young James Forten to inspire the children. As a young black man in America, I remember growing up thinking, wondering what my people's place was in America. And the only thing I walked away with growing up was, hey, we all were slaves, we all were poor, and if we're in the military, we're nothing but manual labor. And that was the whole story that I thought there was. And one of the people I ran into was James Forten. And the man just blew my mind. He's one of the reasons why probably I'm doing what I'm doing now. That the story about blacks in America was so much bigger and so much greater than I ever conceived of. And I'm wondering, how much it been for you guys to realize that you were attached to something that big, that great about us, our black history?
Well, it didn't happen until I was, 40-some years old when it hit, and very disappointed that I didn't know about it 40 years prior to that. It would have been nice to know that, particularly when I was attending, after Gompers Elementary, I went to the Haverford School for Boys, and we had a very intense history program there, along with all the other programs, but no mention at all of James during that period of time there. And that would have been something that if I had known that, I would have been proud to bring to the table to one of my professors of history. Would have been like, hey, guess what? You know, what can you do with this for us, you know, to share this information, you know? We didn't have that. So maybe now I found out that one of my former classmates, George McFarland, and his family are very much involved with the development of this institution, so, and this exhibit. So I'm very happy to know that. I wish I had known what I know now back then, you know. So yeah, it's great to know now, but I certainly wish, yeah, it had happened earlier. Yeah.
Good evening. One of the most powerful things that I had gotten from the exhibition and just the story was the fact that there was a black man, a free black man in the late 1700s, early 1800s, who was an entrepreneur in the city of Philadelphia. And when I tell that story to other entrepreneurs, they are immediately just stunned because there are not many stories of black people who were not enslaved prior to that time period. So, Julie, if you don't mind, could you speak a little bit to that, I guess, the founding of that information, and are there other instances of entrepreneurship within the black community? I mean, obviously there were, because black people had to create a community of other shops and whatnot, but James Forten was one of the most wealthiest men in Philadelphia at that time, and that's a powerful image, a powerful story.
Yeah, I think we forget that his story is, looms so large, but there were other people searching for economic opportunities who were trying to find a niche in an economy and were getting patronage from white customers as well as black customers, whether they were women who used the skills of cooking and baking that maybe they had been forced to learn in enslavement. We think of the street markets. I mean, the famous Crimmel painting of the pepper pot. Here is this young black woman. She's selling what I do apologize, I think sounds fairly dreadful. But it was a very popular kind of street snack for people. The oyster sellers, before there were fast food chains, there were these places. You might not grow super rich, but it is somewhat illuminating to find that people were doing well enough that it wasn't simply keeping body and soul together. If you wanted something catered, it's a little later than the time period you were asking about, the very late 18th century, but Robert Bogle. If you wanted a fancy dinner, you wanted a dance, you wanted a wedding reception, any number of things, the person to call was Robert Bogle. And these men and women are out there in the community. Finding them takes some doing, but having to hunt for them doesn't mean they're not there, that your search is going to come up empty.
Wonderful. Do we have time for one more question? I'm looking at my rulers in the back.
Scott, do you want to choose someone from this side?
In addition to being an entrepreneur, James Forten was also a philanthropist.
Yes.
And I think that is another role that has been acknowledged and written about in Black history. And I know that much of that philanthropy was directed toward education. He gave donations to the first infant school for black children and to other educational enterprises. And I wonder if there were similarly other black philanthropists, or if that was particularly a role that was not as available.
I think people might not have been donating much beyond supporting their church and supporting educational opportunities. One of the things that really intrigued me was when I looked at some of the books of this period, where you typically didn't go into press unless you had subscribers, and the subscription lists would be published. And I looked at 2 or 3 books, and there in the subscribers list was not just James Forten's name, but the names of other, and I would say men, I haven't yet found any women, in the African American community. So who were buying, one particular book I saw was an edition of Phyllis Wheatley's poems, along with an anti-slavery novel which had been translated from French. It's also, I happened upon the records of, I can't remember exactly the name of the dispensary, but there was a medical dispensary in Philadelphia that James Forten and other African Americans were helping to fund. This was where people, black and white, native-born or immigrant, would go for medical treatment because they could not afford to call in a private physician. And Forten and other people are not able to put a lot of money. Forten is exceptionally able to donate and, of course, exceptionally generous, but people are paying $1 or $2 to help get something going that will benefit the entire community. So that role of philanthropy, you're right, we don't hear as much about it. The evidence isn't as easy to come by, and sometimes you just sort of fall into looking at a particular record. But there are records, and it does give you that as you say, the slant that we all too often are not aware of.
Well, I'm sure we could sit here for hours. I know I could. I know we're charged with bringing the evening slowly to an end, so we have time for some book signing, etc. afterwards. And certainly, if you have other questions, you'll have a chance to chat afterwards. But I know Kip was really eager to kind of close the evening with some thoughts, and I want to invite Taylor up to join us on stage. This is the show tune moment. No, just kidding.
Listen, is it on? Oh, hey, it's on.
There are a number of people I did want to thank, and I'm going to just do it with a list.
I thought I was talking, but
To make it. You go ahead, I'm sorry. Go
no, I
right
was just
ahead.
gonna say
Take it away.
thank you for everybody coming out. I don't know much about all of this, as I did a report when I was in 7th grade, so as you can imagine, I don't really remember much from 7th grade. But it's very intriguing, and it's very fascinating, everything that I'm learning today. So I'm glad to be here. I'm very proud, to be a part of this, and I thank you all for coming out. I apologize, Scott, I am not a theatrical person, nor am I a comedian, but I will say, those pink socks.
You can stay.
Yeah. You saw how that was a joke within itself? Yeah. They grasped right onto me, Anyway, Father, go ahead.
Tough act to follow. Well, yeah, I did want to thank, as I said earlier, a former classmate of mine, George McFarland, and his family for their tremendous contributions to this venue and to the exhibit. I also wanted to make sure that I thanked the exhibit committee members, all of them, but in particular the ones that I have been made aware of Danielle Allen and Henry Louis Skip Gates and Carla Trotman. I would like to also thank museum members, employees here, Catherine Babs Miller, Hannah Betcher, Catherine Lynch, Trish Norma, Adrian Watley, Mike Idris for a wonderful tour, Matthew Skick, who I've been involved with since the beginning, and to, of course, the man at the helm here, Mr. Scott Stevenson. And thank my daughter Taylor here for doing a wonderful assignment. I want to thank my brother Rob, his wife Shelley, and their daughter Dana, my niece, for coming. And particularly want to thank Professor Julie Winch for, without So yeah, you can give him that. So here, what we'd like to do is, as a special thanks for all that Julie has done, we'd like to present her because she is absolutely the leading authority. Come on up. Taylor and I have come up with the idea that she deserves a plaque.
Oh, thank you so much.
And it says, Professor Julie Winch, the leading authority on James Forten.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'll take a picture and send it to you.
So that's pretty much it. Thank you all. Thank you all for having an interest in this and coming out this evening. It's tremendous. Ah, yes. Well, yeah, the family Bible. Taylor and I have enjoyed that Bible for a number of years, and when I loaned it to the museum, I wasn't sure, how it was going to end up, but they invested so much into this publication that, Taylor and I both thought that it should become part of this institution. So we are donating the family Bible to the Museum of the American Revolution. Would you lead us? Yeah. Thank you. You're wonderful. This is grand.
Thank you all.
Oh.